Joining you today from Cardiff, where I am going to be helping you with reading Part C. If I could ask you, please, if in the chat box, you could just give us a little bit of information about you, who you are, where you're from, and also whether you are a doctor or a nurse. And that will then help me to find out a little bit more about you, and also to be able to help you better in terms of the course that you're doing. So whilst I'm just waiting for you to put some of those answers into chat, I'm just opening up my iPad so I can see what's going on in your live stream. I very much look forward to helping you. And so the purpose of today's session is really to help you to understand a little bit better how to be successful in reading Part C, which we recognise is a difficult part of the test. Now, as I've said, what we're doing here is aiming to read for the answer. And it'll become apparent as we go through the presentation today exactly what that means. So I'll be doing two things. At the beginning of the presentation, I just want to talk to you a little bit more about what the reading Part C requires you to do. Then we'll be looking at some of the strategies that you can use for success for reading Part C itself. So in terms of the content for reading Part C, it's all about detailed reading. And I think it's fair to say for many people that this is a real challenge. Candidates like you, nurses, doctors, or indeed any medical profession, often find that this is, in some respects, the most difficult part of the test. And there are many reasons, perhaps, for this. It's the longest set of texts in OET reading, about 800 words each. And unlike the other part of the test, it requires you not only to work with what is explicitly stated. So if we think about reading A, we're looking for specific words and phrases that we can take directly from the text. But also, and this is really important, it does require from you good vocabulary and good grammar. In other words, your language skills really do get tested in reading Part C. So please, 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 if you're thinking about doing the OET exam, and of course we do wish you success in that, please remember just how important it is for you to make sure that you genuinely are ready for the test before you register. Because if your general language level and your medical language level is much below the C1 level, you really are going to find this difficult. There are, of course, solutions, and I'll be talking about some of the reading that you should be doing for all parts of the test, but particularly Part C in a few moments. But do get help. Do realise the importance of your language level as you get started in this part of the test. However, having said all of that, a good score is possible. I was working a couple of days ago with a Brazilian student, and he scored in the questions, he scored 7 out of 8 and 6 out of 8, because he's a good reader, so you can do well. And so this webinar is designed to step you through and show you some of those strategies for the reading comprehension questions only. I'm not going to be looking today at the lexical, the vocabulary question or the reference question because of time. Instead, I'm just going to be helping you with the reading comprehension questions. Okay, so let's move on and let's just think about the content of the reading exam itself. So I'm going to begin with an overview of Part C. We'll look at the strategies, and then we're going to have a go together at reading for the answer. And then at the end, there will be opportunities for questions and answers. If you're still joining us, welcome to the session. It's lovely to have you here today. If I can just remind you, please, if you can be putting into the chat some information regarding who you are, where you're from, and so on, that would be really appreciated. Plus, of course, information of whether you are a doctor or a nurse. Okay. So in terms of our learning outcomes, what you're going to gain from this session today, the first thing is that you're going to have an understanding of the appropriate strategies for reading Part C itself. And also, and I think most importantly, I'd like to help you to have an understanding of how reading for the answer will help you to find the right option. Okay, so great to see some of those messages coming in now. Hi there, everyone. So who have we got in the room? We've got lots of nurses joining us from all over the world. Some of you have got your exam very soon, the 11th of October. Oh, we've got a doctor in the room as well. Great. A fantastic range of countries. I see MENA, we've got Libya here, India, Denmark. And so, you know, that's absolutely fantastic. So, okay, whilst you're populating and filling in the comments with where you're from, I'm going to move on and just work with you to think about the focus for the Part C reading test. Now, reading Part C tests, and this is taken from the OET website, the ability to identify detailed meaning and opinion in two texts on topics of interest to healthcare professionals. And I think the important thing here is the detailed meaning and also opinion. And in another session that I'm hoping to arrange with All Stars, we'll spend some time looking how fact, opinion, and author attitude are developed and used in the reading Part C texts, and how this influences success in answering the questions. So I think it's really important, and OET always like us to do this, to actually think about when do you need in your work as a nurse or a doctor or an allied healthcare professional to have the ability to read for detailed meaning and opinion. Now, I think the answer here lies in the type of texts that are being tested in reading Part C. And for those of you who are familiar with these 800-word opinion passages, I think very often they're related to the kind of non-academic reading that you might do to learn about a new topic or a new aspect of a topic. So today we're going to be looking at patient safety, and we're going to be seeing an opinion piece based on some research that's been done. So these passages are not actually from peer-reviewed academic journals, but they are focusing on some of the information that would be written up in those academic texts. So in other words, by learning how to read these better, it's going to help you in your professional development as medical healthcare professionals. But of course, what you're really interested in, I'm sure, is how can you improve your reading Part C skills? And that's going to be the meat of today's session. That's what we'll be looking at in the most detail. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that one of the most important things for the exam generally, but also for developing your ability to read in reading Part C successfully, is the fact that you need to read a lot. And what I have on this screen, and this is available on the OET website, is a list of resources that we encourage you to be reading all the time when preparing for the test. If you only read for OET preparation. For example, you come to the free sessions like this one, or if you're working with an OET trainer, if you work with them, that won't be enough. Free classes on the OET website, here on Facebook, and with a trainer won't be enough to really improve your reading skills. So I really encourage you to be reading as much as possible. And here on the right-hand side is a list of some of the sources that you can use. Go to the OET website, look in the section, you can find it across the top under the term test. Click down to reading. It will give you an overview of the exam, and then you've got this list of resources available to you on the right-hand side. And please feel free in chat to put any other resources that you find useful for reading, and also perhaps an indication of how many hours per week you're reading in English. I would be suggesting you should be reading every day. A little bit and often is by far and away the best way to improve your reading skills and your confidence in reading. Okay, so let's move on and let's think about the format of the reading test, because I think this is helpful when we start thinking about this idea of reading for the answer. The slides are just ticking over in a second. There's a slight delay here on the internet, but whilst the page reloads, let me just remind you that the reading part C is 2 longer passages of approximately 800 words each. There, I describe them as generalist semi-academic texts, and with this possible CPD focus. They're not academic journals, and if you're reading academic journals, I mean, that's great, but I think you need to be reading more reading that's designed for the informed lay reader. So it might be not just a medical professional like you, but the kind of things you might see in a well-written newspaper. Okay, this is important. The text, the design of the questions. There are 8 4-option multiple choice questions focusing on the explicit and implied meaning, attitude and opinion. You have about 2 minutes per question. And this is useful and important to know, because if you're not thinking about timing in the exam, the danger is that you might spend a lot of time on one question because you get stuck. You don't know what the answer is. I don't know if any of you have experienced this. And as a result, what happens is that you lose time. So you need to be strict with yourselves. If after about 2 minutes, you're just not sure what the answer is, move on. So of those 8 questions per text, 6 typically will be a comprehension question, what we're looking at today. And the other ones, which we don't have time to look at in any detail, are the vocabulary and the reference questions. Okay, so moving on again. I'm going to show you on screen now a couple of pages which will pop up. I'm sure you're familiar with them. These are simply screenshots for the session materials that we're working with today. They were put out in advance, and they are sample test 2. And we're going to be looking, in fact, at text 1, which is about patient safety. So in a minute on screen, you'll be able to see that example text. Sorry, that was me getting my place lost with my mouse. There we go. There's the example part C text. And coming on the next slide are the example questions. And if you're not familiar, maybe you've never done an OET test, you're finding out about this part of the reading test for the first time, the next slide will show you what those questions look like. Now, I've talked a lot about reading for the answer, and therefore it's important for us to be clear about what the questions look like, how they are designed. And therefore, on this next slide, you've got a diagram that points out to you the 2 separate parts of the question. On the live stream, you can see questions 7 to 14. It's now ticked over to question 7. And I just want us to be familiar with two terms here, STEM and options. STEM, if you like, is the question itself. And A, B, C, D are the 4 options. What I'm going to do today is teach you how to read for the right answer, which will be one of these 4 options on screen. So what are the strategies and what do you know already about reading for success in reading part C? Well, I guess a good place to start, and do put your answers into chat, are what's the very first thing that you should do when you get a reading part C text? And I'll give you that opportunity to answer some of the questions in the text chat box. I seem to have a bit of a lag, unfortunately, so I'm only seeing comments from about 2-3 minutes ago. The answer to this is that the first thing you should do is actually number the paragraphs on the text. And if I show you here a copy of a text, I'll just hold it up to the camera, you'll be able to see that I've actually numbered down the side the paragraph numbers, and that will be coming up on screen in just one moment. So hopefully it's close enough to the, yes, you can see there the numbers 1 and 2. So for each paragraph, number it. The next thing you should do, and this is absolutely critical, is that you should be reading the question stem, not the text. If you are starting by reading the passage in full, change that, don't do it. Read the question stem for each question, that's the question part, top part, before you do anything else. And then what you need to do is just go to the paragraph, and you'll see in the question design, it often says what in the first, the second, the third paragraph, in order to find the relevant part needed to answer the questions. Then move on when you found using those keywords or key ideas that you've underlined in the stem, read around that to look for the answer. 4, try to answer the question in your own words. So we're reading for the answer. We haven't looked at the options yet. We're just trying to understand the text in our own terms. Then try to match the answer to one of the 4 multiple choice options. So when you've read the passage, you've understood it, you've kind of paraphrased it into your own words, you then look for the options and you find the best fit. But it's important to remember that it must fit in all of its parts. And we'll see a little bit more about what that means as we go along. So these 6 strategies here all refer to reading for the answer. Beneath 7, 8, and 9, I've separated them out because these are ways in which you can work with the other options. So if you can't find a good match, then, you know, if one of them doesn't immediately jump out at you as being a good fit, well, it might be 2 of them, then look at the other options and try to delete any which are clearly wrong. That might be because the text says the opposite or the information is not given. You might be left with 2 options. Now, if you've got a good level of English, if you are, you know, someone with a B2 or a low C1 level, then very probably the answer that you thought was right, that felt right in your stomach, is probably the one that's correct. In my experience, people who overanalyze sometimes could change the correct answer for the wrong one, and be careful about doing that. So I'm going to leave that screen, that slide on screen for a few moments, just but it'll allow me to go back to look at some of the comments that have come in already, and thank you for sharing these with me. One question that I did see was something about how do you increase your reading score from a C+ to a B. And I think there are two things that you need to think about, and thank you for that very interesting question. The first thing you need to consider is, why did you get a C+? Was it because your language level is lower than the level tested by OET? And that is a C1 level, lower advanced. And if the answer is you're getting low scores in all parts of the test, then possibly you need to work on your general English and your medical language skills. If, however, you're getting Bs in all other parts of the test, then what I would suggest is you do a mock test at home in timed conditions and see how many answers you're getting right for each part. So, for example, if you're getting more than 15 or 16 out of 20 on part A, that's good. If you're getting ideally 4 or 5 out of 6 in part B, that's good. If it's part C that's the problem, then I would be suggesting that maybe the issue is your use of time management and strategies, and try and follow the ones that are here on screen. But of course, by attending today's session, hopefully it'll give you some confidence in how to use them. So I hope it's answered that question for you clearly. Okay, so moving on, I've got a question for you. It'll appear on screen in the next few seconds, but it's a quiz which asks you, and it just reviews really what we've just been looking at, a key point here. When you're doing a Part C text question, what should you read first? Should you read the text or should you read the question stem? And I'm just going to pause here for a few moments for you to put your comments into the comment box below. So that question again, that will be appearing on screen in a second. Here we go. What should you read first, the text or the question stem, the bit at the top above the options? And let's wait and see what answers come in into the chat box. Right, I'm seeing lots of people putting in number 2, the stem only. Yeah, absolutely. Question first. Yeah, good. Well done, Savita. That's fantastic. Okay, well done. In fact, there was another option there, which was the stem and the options. It's the stem only. Well done. There was another question here about where can you get other materials for practicing reading Part C. And I think there are 2 answers to that one. So thank you for that question. The first answer is that there are some good quality published materials. There is the official OET, and I'm just going to reach across to my bookshelf. Of course, I can't find it just now, but there is the official OET nursing course book. I'd recommend that. There's also another lovely book, the OET Skills Builder. But the final suggestion I would make is go onto the OET website, and if you can afford to, see if you can find an OET, ideally premium provider, or if not a preliminary provider, because these have all been accepted by OET themselves as being good quality OET teachers. And of course, the other thing is to attend sessions like this one, because Reading C does come up quite a few times. Second quiz question for you. And oops, I've just revealed the question, so I have to go quickly here, is when you've read and understood the stem, what should you read next? Should you read the text, the paragraph, or should you read the multiple choice options? So we start with stem, but after the stem, what do we go to? The answer's on screen already. And if you were thinking text, then well done. Now there's a question here for what's wrong with reading the text first. Good question. You'll waste time. Reading Part C asks you to look for detailed information. And if I can give you an analogy, it's a bit like, in some ways, reading a train timetable. When you arrive at the train station, you could just look at the timetable board and you could see the information for all of the trains that are leaving. That's probably not very helpful, because actually what you want to know is what time the London train or the Nairobi train is. And therefore, what you tend to do is have in your mind a question, and then you read a text to find the answer to that question. Therefore, we save time and we read better when we know what we are reading for and why we are reading. So that explains why we start with the question stem, because it tells us what we're looking for. Then we go to the paragraph in which it's contained to find the information. And then we read carefully to read for the answer. Okay, so let's start. And what you're going to need for the rest of this session is a copy of the first reading passage in sample test 2. And it's the text that's called Patient Safety, highlighting a collaborative initiative to improve patient safety. Don't worry too much if you haven't got it in front of you, because I will be showing you on screen the question. So here we have on screen our first question, which is, what point is made about death of a female patient called Mary? Now, we should think, first of all, remember about the stem. So I'd like you to think about what are the key ideas in this question stem that we would then go and look for in the passage. So if you were in the exam, what keywords would you be underlining in the stem here? And if you like, you can put some of your answers into chat. Fiona, you're asking, is there going to be a recording of this? Yes, there will be. It's going out live, but I also believe that these then go out onto the, they remain on Facebook for you to watch, and I believe they go onto YouTube as well. Okay, so I'm just going to move on, because that's hopefully given you enough time for you to decide that probably the keywords for this first question are point is made, death, female patient, Mary. So when we go to the first paragraph of the text, yeah, well done, Faith, absolutely, point made, death, Mary. But Mary, I would just, sorry, Faith, I would just add here that we should also be thinking about female patient, because it's the death of a patient, not a nurse, unlikely as that is in the text that we're looking for. So yeah, well done. So if we then look at the text itself, and that'll be coming up on screen in a few minutes, what we're able to do with the text is start looking for those key ideas. So we'll be looking, we'll be skimming the text quickly. In fact, effectively, we'll be looking for keywords. So we'll be scanning the text for Mary, tragedy, died. And if you have a look at the text that's going to be appearing on screen in just 1 second, it will only just take a couple of seconds, I'm sure, for you to have found Mary, died. Mary at the top, died at the bottom. And in fact, some of you might have also picked up that in the second line, there is this word tragedy. So at this point, now that we've identified where in the text the information is looking for, what we should then be doing is thinking about, well, what point is made about her death? We know she's Mary, we know she's a patient, and there was a tragedy, she died. But what point is being made in the text? Well, as we read on, what followed was a tragedy made worse by the fact that it needn't have occurred at all. You then get some details about the accident, a mistaken injection, how it happened, what the doctors did to try to save her, but it was in vain, she died. So if I put this into my own words, it seems to be the case that the point about this death was that it was not only an accident, a mistake, but it needn't have happened, it needn't have occurred at all. It was somehow avoidable. Okay. So if we now then look at the question options, immediately I can see option A, it was entirely preventable, which fits really nicely with the made worse by the fact it needn't have occurred at all. So that seems to be a really good fit. Nobody was willing to accept the blame. Yeah, I don't like that answer. It's not really there. Surgeons should have tried harder to save her life. Well, they did try, but there's nothing about the fact that they should have tried harder. And it's a kind of accident which is becoming increasingly common. Well, no, we know it happened because of confusion. So we're going to stick with our first option, A. It was made worse by the fact it needn't have happened or needn't have occurred at all. Option A, it was entirely preventable. And that is the right answer. So that, I hope, starts to give you, and fantastic, I'm just looking in comments, and I can see Aidan, Tin, Purpa, and Alia, apologies if your pronunciation is very poor, that you've got to the same point as well. Fantastic. Now, this is what I mean about reading for the answer. So let's just quickly review what we did. We read the STEM, and we identified the key points. We then looked quickly through the passage to see where we might need to start reading. And we saw Mary tragedy died, so it's somewhere here. And then we asked ourselves, well, what in the text tells us what point is being made about the death? Why is it significant? And we found this passage made worse by the fact it needn't have occurred at all, which we're then able to identify with option A. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the next question, which is question 9. I'm jumping question 8 because we're not looking at the vocabulary questions today. So on screen in just one moment, but let me read it for you if you don't have a copy of the text in front of you, is by quoting Dixon Woods in the second paragraph, the writer shows that the professor ... So as before, we need to be thinking about what are the key ideas in this STEM. So if I just give you a few seconds to think about this, and I always suggest when I'm preparing students for Reading C that you underline the key ideas that we're looking for in the STEM. And as I said, as before, if you'd like to, you can pop some of your ideas into the chat box, into comment below. Okay, so I'm just bringing up on screen in just one second the points that I've underlined. And what I'd like to say at this point is in the question STEM, when you're underlining, probably what you're looking for is 3, 4, or even 5 separate points. For me, for this question, question 9, we're looking for, I think, 4 points. Quoting. So this is something that Dixon Wood has said. We're probably looking for something in speech marks in the text. We're looking for something said by this person, Dixon Woods. We're looking in the second paragraph. We're also thinking about this, right? What, by quoting, the writer shows that the professor. So in other words, the quote supports an opinion or a view taken by Dixon Woods. That's what we're looking for. So, for example, Ene, well done, you've put in Dixon Woods' second paragraph. But I think also, as Amira has said, it's important to think about the word quoting. And yes, Purpa, you've put in the word shows, well done. Professor links back actually to Dixon Woods, as will become apparent in the text. So if we now look at the text, clearly, we know what we're looking for. We're looking for a quotation or possibly a paraphrase. We're looking for Dixon Woods herself. And that will enable us to then think about the answer to the question. So just as that's loading on screen in a few seconds, you should be able to see down here in the fourth line, there is a speech mark. There it is there. The end of the quotation ends here, and then Dixon would appears here. So it's in this area that we want to be looking at. So we've got this in other words. So this is an explanation of the quotation. So let's look at the quotation. What did Dixon Wood say? Well, she said, there's a danger that they tend to encourage effort substitution. You think, what does that mean? In other words, people concentrate on the areas that are being incentivized, but neglect other areas. And there's a further quotation. It's not even necessarily conscious neglect. People only have a limited amount of time. It's inevitable they focus on areas that are measured and rewarded. So what we need to do now is try and kind of think about, well, what does that mean? So people, the context here as we look through the text, we know we're talking about a healthcare context. So we can presume here we're talking about healthcare professionals. They concentrate on what the areas that are being incentivized, but neglect areas. So some areas they ignore, but other areas they focus on more because there is an incentive, there is a bonus, there is an advantage in doing so. They're not doing it necessarily, they maybe not be aware that they're doing it, but they focus on the areas that are measured and rewarded. So in other words, it seems to be the case that Dixon Woods is arguing that healthcare professionals in their work focus, without realizing it sometimes, on those areas where they're being measured and rewarded, and other areas are being ignored. Now, if we go to the options, very quickly, I think you'll be able to see one of the options that stands out. And I'm just pausing here to give you time to think what you feel might be the option that stands out in question 9. It'll be arriving on your screens in just a few moments. Hopefully you've got the passage in front of you. So if you'd like to perhaps share your ideas into chat now, A, B, C, or D, is there one of the options that stands out for you as being a paraphrase of what's in blue in the text there? Okay, so if I look at A, healthcare employees have to make certain choices. Well, that certainly seems to be the point that is made in A. People have a limited amount of time, so it's inevitable to focus on areas that are measured and rewarded. In other words, they are choosing those areas, not the other ones that are not measured and not rewarded. So A seems to fit. Now, in the text, a number of you are coming up with A, good. Some of you talked about B, doubts whether reward schemes are likely to put patients at risk. You remember I said earlier that every part of an option should fit. Now, I want to challenge you and ask, is there anything in the text that says that Dixon Wood doubts that this will cause a risk to the patients? We do have the word danger that they tend to encourage effort substitution. But the effort substitution refers to the behavior of the healthcare professionals. There is nothing here about patients at risk. B is not in the text as an answer to this stem. So that would explain why B is wrong. Believe staff should be paid a bonus. No, she's not arguing for bonuses. She's talking about the impact of incentivization, not the benefits of incentivization itself, be they financial or other. And she doesn't really talk about the choices being poor choices. She really seems to understand the mechanism by which this happens. It's not even necessarily conscious neglect. She understands, she empathizes with their decision-making. Option A is the correct answer. So what have we learned by looking at question 9? Well, hopefully 2 things. Number 1, by continuing to practice this reading for the answer strategy, something may well jump out at you. But don't worry if that's not the case, because we can always go back to our secondary strategies of looking at the others, eliminating things that are not said or are contradicted by the text. We may end up with one option that looks a possibility. And for many of you, I think, it was between A and B. And there what we do is we look carefully at them to make sure that every single part of the answer is in the text. And whilst, yes, reward schemes is a nice paraphrase for the incentivization of the healthcare professionals, there is really nothing about putting patients at risk. It makes this question wrong, or rather this option wrong. Okay, let's just do one more together, and then that will give us an opportunity to then hand over for you to have a go yourselves at this. So question 10, as before, we have our question stem. What point is made about checklists in the 3rd paragraph? And I think this is hopefully an easy question stem to identify the key ideas. So give you 30 seconds, everyone. Can you put into chat what are the key ideas, the keywords in this stem that would help you to look for the answer in the paragraph? And your 30 seconds starts now. Jency, you're asking about how can you find out the meaning of a particular word or phrase. We're not looking at that today because of time pressures. We're focusing on the reading comprehension questions. I hope to run another session on reading part C in the future, and I'll make sure that we can cover that in there for you. Okay. So yeah, answers coming in already. Yeah, fantastic, everyone, doing really well. What point? Checklist, 3rd paragraph, absolutely. So in our 3rd paragraph, we're looking for information about checklists. That's probably the keyword that we read for in the text in that 3rd paragraph. Then we try to understand, well, what point is made about them? In other words, what does the text tell us about checklists? So there we go. As we can see on the screen in a few moments' time, the word checklist appears in the 3rd paragraph a number of times, 1st line, 2nd line, and 3rd line. So if we start analysing the information here, so 2013, they published a study. And what was the study about? It was the use of checklists introduced in hospitals to reduce complications and deaths. Okay, her research found checklists may have little impact and may make things worse. So we're already thinking that checklists aren't entirely helpful all the times. It seems to go on to explain this with a quotation. The checklists sometimes introduced new risks. Nurses would use the lists as box ticking exercises. They'd tick the box to say the patient had had their antibiotics when there were no antibiotics in the hospital, for example. So the point seems to be that checklists, in fact, have little impact. They may make things worse by introducing new risks. For example, people filling in the list incorrectly by saying the opposite of what was true. They also reinforce the hierarchies. Nurses had to try to get surgeons to do certain tasks, but the surgeons used the situation as an opportunity to display their power and refuse. So there's a second problem with the checklists. They seem to make the order of staff here, the hierarchy, the surgeons at the top, the nurses beneath them, and the surgeons use this to show their power. Yeah, checklists don't seem to be very popular, do they? So if we take all of this information about people giving incorrect answers and surgeons using them to show their power, is there a particular answer, A, B, C, or D in the options that stands out as meaning the same? And I think with this one, as it appears on screen in a few seconds' time, there will be one question that, or rather one answer, sorry, one option that really leaps out to you as being a reflection of what's underlined in blue. So again, if I can invite you to put your answers into chat. We've got lots of D's coming in. We've got a couple of C's as well. Okay, just wait for a few more to come in. As you're writing your answers, let's maybe look at D and C. So information recorded doesn't always reflect the reality. Well, we know that nurses tick boxes about giving out drugs that didn't exist. So that's not reflecting reality. And we know that nurses need surgeons to sign things off, but the surgeons refuse. So things don't get ticked correctly. So that's clearly another example. So D seems to be a good fit. And more answers coming in now, all relating to D. Some of you said C. They're a burden for overworked nursing staff. Well, it's important here that we look for what's in the text, not what we feel might be a sensible answer in the real world. And as we look through the text, there is nothing about extra work for overworked, overstretched nursing staff. So we can reject C as being not there. A couple of you also suggested B. Nurses and surgeons are reluctant to deal with them. Well, no, the nurses are ticking them, but they're just ticking them incorrectly. The surgeons are not reluctant to deal with them. They're using the checklists to show their power by saying to a nurse, no, I'm not going to do this for you. So it's not that they're reluctant to use them, it's that they complete them incorrectly. So D is the correct answer here. Please remember, and it comes back to my point of earlier about every part of text needs to be in the option correct. So B, yes, you're right. Nurses and surgeons are both involved. Here we have the nurses, and we also have the surgeons mentioned. And this is a kind of distractor. We'll see words in options that appear exactly in the text. But what comes around those spotted keywords, and this is what we call word spotting, where someone like you doing the test spots a keyword from an option in the text and goes, yeah, we've got nurses, yeah, we've got surgeons, B's correct. You need to read more detail. Reluctant to deal with them. There is nothing in the passage about reluctance. So this is an example in B of keyword spotting that is a distractor. What is in the rest of the option isn't in the text. So D is the correct answer. Jens is asking, where can I get more reading practice tests? I've answered this one already, Jency, but it is a really helpful question, so thank you for sharing it with us. A couple of answers. You can look at the Cambridge official nursing OET guide. Anything that's available published by writers like Virginia Allen is really useful. Virginia Allen is an OET specialist. She writes for the OET exam. She's involved in writing the writing paper, but she is a highly experienced OET premium provider trainer. She is an ex-nurse. In fact, she still is a registered nurse, and she's also a qualified language teacher. So the important thing here, I think, Jency, and to all of you, is to make the point that you should be looking for materials which are written by OET experts. So if you've got material that's published by someone who is an OET premium provider, or indeed a preliminary provider, then that's a good way to go for looking. Don't forget the OET website has 3 sample texts on it itself, so you can look for extra practice there. What I would avoid you doing is getting material from the website. What I would suggest there is, if you're getting things on social media from non-authorized places, WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups that are not official, frankly, be very, very careful about the quality of the materials that are being shared. The last option, of course, is that if you go to the OET website, you'll be able to see a list of OET premium and preliminary providers. They are really good because they have access to additional material that they are able to use in their teaching. They won't give them to you for free. We're not allowed to, but we can use them as teaching material if you're willing to pay for classes. Couple of other questions coming in. Let's look at these now. Tin is asking about the strategies for reading part B and also listening part C. Now, I think the answer here, Tin, for the way that the exam is designed is that the A questions are very similar. So reading A and listening A are both about listening for or reading for specific information. You are taking the exact language from the passage, the reading passage or the audio recording, and using that as your answer. Listening C and reading C are very similar. They are the longer passage and they probe understanding. One thing I would say about listening C is that the big difference is that you must read both the stem and the options together. If you've not read the options for listening and you are then reading them and listening at the same time to the recording, you're going to get in a mess. So reading, stem, text, options, listening C, stem, quick look at the options, listen, match. Listening and B and reading B similar. For reading B, what I would suggest is, yes, look at the stem, get an idea of what the question is asking you for, then go to the text. And when you've read the text and you've understood it, you've linked the question to what's in the passage, then you look at the options. So in that respect, yes, I use the mnemonic STEXTOP, stem, text, options. step stop. And I think that's a really useful approach for reading B and reading C. So good question there. Thank you very much indeed. More questions coming in about reading B. I'm not going to go into those today, but I will very happily run a session on reading B sometime in the future. I think I've got one of my students in the group. Christy, I'm not sure if that's you. If it is, thank you very much, Neil, for your suggestion. Christy, hello. It's always nice when I see my own students in these groups. And I hope for all of you that some of the suggestions today have been helpful. We've gone very slowly, but what I've wanted to do is really enable you to start thinking about the strategies here. So we're going to go for one final question, but for this one, I'm not going to step you through it. I'm going to simply ask you to have a go yourselves. So coming up on screen in just one moment is the question stem for question 11. And that question stem, I'll read it for you now whilst we're waiting for it to come on screen, is what problem is mentioned in the 4th paragraph? And if you're joining this session later on and you missed the strategies, remember the first thing you should do is identify the key ideas in the stem. So a few seconds for you to be thinking about what you think the key ideas are here. In the test, you can underline them if you're doing the paper-based version of the text in your question paper. If you wanted to share some answers in chat, you can do so. Thank you very much indeed, Jency, for saying that you're enjoying today's session. And you all ask a very good question about where can you get more free lessons. OET All-Stars is an initiative where premium providers, we are therefore the people who have gone through the most training with OET. A small number of those premium providers come together and they give back. They offer free lessons here on the OET official Facebook page. So here is a really good place to be working for free with OET premium providers. So I would suggest where you are here today, Jency, is where you should be looking. There will be, going forward, a slightly smaller number than previously. I think I'm right in saying that we're looking to do 2 sessions a week in the future. And that'll be across all of the All-Stars. So yeah, some good answers coming in. If you've decided problem mentioned 4th paragraph, well done. Can I ask you now to have a look at that 4th paragraph and think about where you can see a problem. And here, think about maybe the word problem, but also about synonyms for a problem. Okay, yeah, okay, so in this one, the word problem doesn't actually occur, does it? So I'm just showing you on screen where I thought we needed to be looking. And I think a key word here is issues. But also, as I thought about it more, if you try to understand something, it's probably something that you're finding difficult, problematic. So that's another option as well. So if you read around that area in the text, the next trick is try to understand what is the problem. And I'll give you just a minute or so to think about this. Christy's put in urgent issues, Wafa's put in issues. Well done. Kate, you've put in massive risk. Okay. And I think you're right that massive risk is something else we could have underlined. The massive risk refers back to what was mentioned before. So I'm now going to show you on screen what I felt was the actual problem itself. And if you've decided that the problem was that Dixon Wood found differences in approaches between hospitals, but also between units and even between shifts, which we try and put into our own words, don't we? So have a think about, what does that mean? Well, it means that from one hospital to another hospital, things are done differently. They have different ways. But also in the same hospital, different units are doing things in the same thing in different ways. And in fact, even in one place, maybe it's a ward, there is a change in the way we do things, a difference in approach between staff on different shifts. In other words, what she's discovered is that there isn't a clear one way of doing things. Different people do things in different ways, depending on where they work, the unit where they work, and even between the teams that they work in. So if we now look at the options for question 11, what we're looking for is something that seems to have this idea of doing things differently when we should be doing them in the same way. And that option will be coming up on screen in a few moments. So again, apologies for pronunciation, aung, lei, tin, well done. Those are all the key ideas here. So if we look at the options here, A, B, C, D, does anything jump out as meaning there's lots of differences? Things aren't the same when they perhaps should be. And I'll give you a few moments. We've got answers coming in, a couple of answers for D, a couple of answers for C as well. Okay, the majority of you are looking at D, right? Now, let's look at C and D then. We seem to have already decided that A and B don't fit. So I'm going to begin this time with C, the idea that most of you didn't go for. Poor communication. Well, communication is about talking to one another. And I think the key here is in that first line where it says, Dixon Woods and her team spend time in hospitals to try to understand which systems are in place and how they are used. And then she talks about the differences in approaches. So the thing here is that systems are carried out differently. That is why D is the correct answer rather than C. She doesn't blame poor communication. She doesn't explain why these differences exist. She simply talks about the fact that there are differences in the systems, and that explains why consistency and its lack, D, is the correct answer rather than C, poor communication. Communication is not mentioned in this question, in this text. It's the systems that themselves are not consistent. Neha, you've said, I think it doesn't make sense. I'm sorry, Neha, I'm not quite sure what you mean by it doesn't make sense. If you wanted to put your point back into the comment box, I'll try to help you. But for now, that brings us to the end of this hour. Now, we've spent an hour looking at 4 questions, and that's absolutely fine, because when we're learning how to do OET, it is absolutely critical that you understand that learning about the test is not just about practicing past papers. Let me give you an analogy with which to finish. It's like learning to drive a car. Imagine that you're learning to drive and your test instructor takes you onto the route of your driving test. Well, great. You're familiar with the road that you'll be using when the examiner is with you. But imagine that your driving test instructor never shows you any other roads. Does that make you a good driver? No. It just means you know how to drive on one road. To be a good driver, we need to have lots of practice and lots of learning. And it's the same for all parts of the OET test. Practice tests alone will not help you to learn how to be successful in the test. What you need is input, thinking about developing your medical language, and if necessary, your general English as well, if you're much lower than the C1 level. And then when you're ready to start thinking about doing the test, spending some time, and when I say time, I mean literally spend time thinking about, analysing, working with the questions. These don't even have to be from the OET past exams. They can in fact be from other material. If you go to premium providers, they'll be able to provide you with not just practice test materials, but with general learning materials to help you develop your reading skills. So my advice to you would be what I said at the beginning of the session. Read as much as you can. Come to these free lessons, and if you can afford to, work with a recognized OET provider, be it a preliminary provider or a premium provider. I'd love to work with you. I'm here at CELT, www.celt.co.uk. We're based in the UK. We work with people, including Christy, who's in the chat here themselves. So I hope that gives you an overview in what to do. I just want to answer one last question. Was a number of you are asking about the failure to act promptly. Now, this is wrong because it would require in the text for there to be information about someone not responding quickly to a problem. So if we look at the text, and so she spends time in hospitals understanding the systems are in place, how they're used. Nothing about acting quickly there. She finds differences in approaches. Standardization and harmonization are two of the most urgent issues we have to tackle. So she talks about the fact that it is important that hospitals do learn to make sure that their teams and their systems are similar across hospitals, across units, and staff on shifts in the same ward. It's urgent that these are improved. But she's not talking here about a failure to act promptly. She's talking about an urgent address of this system. So the problem is not the failure to address the issue. The problem is the issue itself, which is this lack of consistency. And that explains, I hope, why question A is incorrect. Okay, everyone, we've run over slightly, but I hope that's given you a further understanding about reading for the answer in reading C. There are lots of other things we could have talked about today. We could have talked about fact, opinion, and author attitude. We could have talked about distractors, and I hope to come back to that at some point in the future. But for now, if you're taking the test in the near future, I'd like to say good luck, and more importantly, success to all of you. If you're at the beginning of your OET journey, take these couple of suggestions away. Read as much as you can for reading C. Yes, focus on the strategies, but just as importantly, or maybe more so, focus on the development of your medical language skills. Finally, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you probably in about a month to 6 weeks when we will be doing our next OET CELT All-Star session. In the meantime, everyone, thank you and good luck.